There is a fear we all share, deep down in the quietest parts of ourselves. It's not the fear of the dark or of monsters under the bed. It's the fear of being wrong, of looking into the eyes of something ancient and malevolent, and seeing only kindness looking back. It's the fear that the very person you were taught to trust without question might be the source of the nightmare. Hello and welcome. I have a story for you tonight. A story not born from campfire tales or the pages of a forgotten book, but from the cold, hard data of our own reality. A story pieced together from police reports, eyewitness testimony, and a disturbing pattern of digital whispers that began echoing across the internet in early 2025. If you're brave enough to keep listening, I suggest you do so with the lights on. And if you find your way to the end of this tale, consider subscribing. If you dare to know what other truths are hiding in the shadows of the world you think you know. Because the story you are about to hear, it didn't happen in some remote, haunted forest. It happened in neighborhoods just like yours, to people just like you. And the most terrifying part is all true. It began, as so many modern mysteries do, with a whisper on the internet. In February of 2025, data analysts at Google Trends noticed a peculiar, sharp spike in search queries. The terms were unsettlingly specific, and they were being searched in the dead of night, from IP addresses clustered in suburban and semi-rural towns across the American Midwest and Northeast. The searches were things like old woman staring from woods, grandmother figure not moving, and the one that would eventually give the phenomenon its name, smiling woman at window. For the analysts, it was a curious data anomaly. For the people doing the searching, it was a waking nightmare. The first documented case comes from the small, snow-dusted town in Vermont called Pownell. A college student named Liam Cheney, 21, was house-sitting for his grandparents while they wintered in Florida. Their home was an old, sprawling colonial at the edge of a dense, leafless wood. On the night of February 18th, Liam was playing video games online with friends when his dog, a normally placid golden retriever named Bear, suddenly stood up, its fur bristling, and let out a low, guttural growl directed at the large bay window overlooking the backyard. Liam paused his game, listening. The house was silent except for the wind moaning through the eaves. He shrugged it off, attributing it to a raccoon or a deer. But Bear wouldn't relax. He stood his ground, a steady rumble in his chest, his eyes fixed on the blackness beyond the glass. Curious and slightly unnerved, Liam walked to the window, cupped his hands against the glare of the living room lamp, and peered into the darkness. First, he saw nothing, just the skeletal shapes of trees against the slightly lighter sky. Then his eyes adjusted, and he saw her. Standing at the very tree line, maybe 50 yards away, was a figure. It was an elderly woman. She was wearing a long, dark, old-fashioned coat, the kind with a fur collar and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed her face. She was perfectly still, and she was staring directly at the house. At him, Liam's blood went cold. It was freezing outside, well below zero with the wind chill. What was an old woman doing standing motionless in the woods at night? He grabbed a flashlight from a drawer, his hands trembling slightly, and shone it out into the yard. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the falling snow and the woman. The light hit her directly, but she didn't flinch. She didn't raise a hand to shield her eyes. She didn't move a muscle. She just kept staring. And then, as Liam watched, frozen in place, the woman's lips slowly stretched into a wide, impossibly broad smile. It was a smile devoid of warmth, of joy. It was a rictus grin, a mask of pure, unsettling glee that never reached the shadows where her eyes should be. Liam stumbled back from the window, his heart hammering against his ribs. He called the police. When the Pownell Sheriff's deputy arrived 20 minutes later, he found Liam pale and shaken. The deputy, a seasoned officer named Greg Olson, swept the tree line with his high-powered spotlight. There was nothing. No footprints in the fresh snow leading to or from the spot where Liam insisted the woman had been standing. The snow there was pristine, undisturbed. Deputy Olson was polite but dismissive. He suggested it was a trick of the light, a shadow, maybe a prank. He left, and Liam spent the rest of the night with every light in the house blazing. Bear glued to his side, growling at every creak and groan of the old house. Liam's story, which he posted the next day on a local community forum, was met with a mix of concern and skepticism. But then the replies started pouring in. And that's when the pattern emerged. A woman in Oneida, New York, reported seeing an identical old woman standing in the empty lot next to her children's elementary school, just staring and smiling as parents hurried their kids inside. A family in rural Pennsylvania claimed one appeared at the end of their driveway every night for a week, never coming closer, never speaking, just watching, and smiling that terrible, vacant smile. The descriptions were always the same. The long dark coat, the wide-brimmed hat, the motionless stance, and that smile, that horrifying, unchanging smile. Local news outlets in these small towns began picking up the stories, running segments with titles like The Grinning Granny Ghost or Suburbia's Spooky Spectre, often with a tone of lighthearted amusement. But for the witnesses, there was nothing funny about it. The encounters were marked by a profound sense of dread, a primal feeling of being stalked, of being studied by something that wore the skin of a harmless old lady but was anything but harmless. The phenomenon gained its official name from a YouTube video uploaded on March 3, 2025, by a teenager in Ohio named Chloe Martinez. Using her phone's zoom function from the safety of her upstairs bedroom, she managed to capture shaky, grainy footage of the figure standing under a street lamp at the end of her cul-de-sac. The video, titled "The Smiling Woman is Outside My House Again," went viral, garnering millions of views in days. In the video, you can hear Chloe's panicked breathing as she zooms in. The figure is clear, an old woman in a dark coat and hat, standing perfectly still under the orange glow of the lamp. And despite the distance and the poor quality, one thing is unmistakable: the pale, wide curve of that relentless, chilling smile. The comments section exploded. Thousands of people from across the country, and eventually the world, shared their own nearly identical stories. Pattern was solidifying. This was not an isolated prank or a series of coincidental hallucinations. This was something else, something organized, or something supernatural. Law enforcement agencies, initially skeptical, were forced to take notice as the number of reports skyrocketed into the hundreds, then the thousands. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit even opened a low-priority file, initially suspecting a sophisticated, nationwide hoax or a strange new form of social experimentation. They looked for connections between the witnesses. There were none. They analyzed the locations. They were random, spanning multiple states with no discernible pattern. They searched for any individual matching the description traveling between these towns. They found nothing. No car rentals, no bus tickets, no hotel records. It was as if the woman was simply appearing and disappearing at will. The official explanation, when pressed, was mass hysteria fueled by social media suggestion. But the witnesses knew that was a lie. What they saw was real. It was flesh and blood, and it was watching them. The story takes a darker, more sinister turn on the night of March 15th, in the quiet town of Millbrook, New York. This is where our story finds its focus and its most credible and terrified witness. Dr. Eris Thorne, a 68-year-old retired clinical psychologist. Dr. Thorne was a rational man, a man of science who had built his career on debunking irrational fears. He lived alone in a modest home on a large, wooded property. He was aware of the smiling woman phenomenon. Of course, it was inescapable, but he dismissed it as digital folklore, a modern-day legend. That changed at 2:17 a.m. Dr. Thorne was awoken by the sound of his doorbell ringing. Not once, not twice, but a single sustained press that lasted for a full 10 seconds, a constant, insistent drone that cut through the silent house. Alarmed, he went to his bedroom window, which overlooked the front porch. There, standing directly under the porch light, was a woman. She was old, her face a web of wrinkles. She wore a long, black wool coat with a matted fur collar and a wide-brimmed black hat. And she was smiling. It was the exact smile from the stories, from the videos. A smile that was too wide, too full of teeth, and utterly vacant in the eyes. Her finger was still pressed firmly on the doorbell, the sound continuing to blare. Dr. Thorne's scientific mind raced. This was no ghost. This was a person. A very real, very disturbing person on his porch. He did what any rational person would do. He called the police. Then he did something he would later regret. He went downstairs. He didn't open the door. He went to the side window, hidden by a heavy curtain, and peered out. The woman had finally removed her finger from the doorbell. The sudden silence was more deafening than the noise had been. She just stood there, on his welcome mat, her hands clasped primly in front of her, that smile never wavering. She wasn't looking at the door anymore. She was staring directly at the window where Dr. Thorne was hiding. She knew he was there. As he watched, frozen, she slowly raised one of her clasped hands and pointed a single, bony finger directly at him. Then, her smile, impossibly, widened further, and she spoke. Her voice, according to Dr. Thorne's official statement to the Millbrook police, was not the frail, raspy voice of an old woman. It was clear, calm, and chillingly melodic. She said only 7 words, "I'm here to collect what's owed." At that moment, the police arrived, their sirens cutting through the night. The woman's head turned slowly toward the flashing lights. Her smile never faded. She simply turned, walked down the porch steps, and disappeared into the shadowy tree line at the edge of Dr. Thorne's property. The officers conducted a thorough search of the area with K-9 units. They found nothing. No tracks. No scent for the dogs to follow. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Dr. Thorne was visibly shaken. A man who had built his life on rationality had been confronted with something utterly irrational. But it was what happened next that chilled investigators to the bone. Upon returning to his house with the officers, Dr. Thorne made a discovery. On his front door, scratched into the wood at about eye level, was a symbol. It was fresh, the raw wood gleaming in the porch light. It wasn't a word. It was a series of intricate, interlocking lines and curves. A sigil. The police photographed it. It was unlike any gang sign or known symbol they could reference. It was uploaded to a federal database. And that's when the first true thread of the mystery began to unravel. An archivist with the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, doing unrelated research on early American folk magic, saw the symbol on a news report about the Millbrook incident. She recognized it instantly. It was a rare, almost forgotten witch mark, or apotropaic mark, used by Pennsylvania Dutch hexmeisters in the 18th and 19th centuries. But this particular mark had a very specific and very dark purpose. It wasn't meant to ward off evil. According to the fragile, crumbling journals she referenced, this mark was used to claim something. It was a symbol of debt. A marker used by practitioners of an obscure branch of folk magic to signify that a contract, often one made generations ago, was coming due. The journal entry described it as a calling card of the collector, an entity or individual that would appear to retrieve what was promised. The description of the collector in the journal was brief and chilling. It wears the face of the crone, for it collects the debt of time. It smiles, for it knows the bargain cannot be broken. This revelation sent shockwaves through the small communities that had been plagued by sightings. This was no longer just a scary story. It was a phenomenon with a historical precedent, a terrifying folklore that had seemingly sprung to life. People began digging through their own family histories, searching for any mention of strange bargains, deals with dubious figures, or associations with the old folk magic traditions. Panic began to set in. The smiling woman wasn't a random apparition. She was targeted. She was looking for specific people, specific families. The question was, why? What was the debt? The digital sleuths of Reddit and YouTube took up the mantle. They cross-referenced the locations of every major smiling woman sighting with historical census data, land deeds, and records of early settlers. A pattern, buried for centuries, began to emerge. Every single town, every single neighborhood where a credible sighting had occurred, had been settled in the late 1700s by a specific group of immigrants from an isolated valley in Germany, known for its history of folk magic and occult practices. These settlers had all faced a brutal, famine-stricken winter in 1789, and according to a single, surviving letter found in a Pennsylvania archive, That winter had been so devastating that some of the families had made entreaties to the old ways and struck bargains to see the spring. The letter did not detail the nature of these bargains. It only stated that the spring arrived abruptly and with unnatural abundance, and that the families who had participated never spoke of it again, but were forever changed, carrying a shadow of gratitude and fear. The theory formed online, a terrifying mosaic of history and horror. The bargain struck in 1789 to survive the winter had a cost, a debt, and that debt was not to be paid by the individuals who made the deal, but by their bloodline generations later. The smiling woman, the collector, was not appearing at random. She was appearing at the homes of the direct descendants of those original settlers. She was coming to collect the interest on a centuries-old loan. But what was the currency? What did she want? The answer came on April 1st, 2025, and it was no joke. In a suburb of Rochester, New York, a man named Ben Miller, a known descendant of one of the families identified by the online researchers, vanished. His home showed no signs of a struggle. His wallet, keys, and phone were left on the kitchen counter. His front door was unlocked. The only anomaly was reported by his next-door neighbor, who told police she had been awoken around 3 a.m. by the sound of a woman singing a soft, lullaby-like tune. When she looked out her window, she saw an old woman in a dark coat and hat walking away from Ben's house and into the night. And she was not alone. Walking beside her, his hand held gently in hers, was Ben Miller. He was walking calmly, obediently, like a sleepwalker. And on his face, visible in the moonlight, was a wide, placid, empty smile, a perfect mirror of the smiling woman's own. The neighbor thought it was odd, but assumed it was a family member visiting. It wasn't until the next day, when Ben was reported missing, that she came forward. Her description of the old woman was precise. It was her. Ben Miller was never seen again. His case remains open, a cold file with a bizarre and unexplained witness statement. But his disappearance was a catalyst, confirmed the worst fears. The smiling woman wasn't just a passive observer. She was an active predator. Her purpose was not to frighten, but to acquire. The debt was not money or property. It was people. The descendants themselves were the currency. Panic turned to outright terror in the identified communities. People installed security systems, bought guns, and formed neighborhood watch groups specifically to look for the old woman. But she was never seen by the watch groups. She was only ever seen by her intended targets, alone in the dead of night. It was as if she could choose who could perceive her. The climax of this horror, the event that brought the full weight of the federal investigation to bear, occurred in a secluded farmhouse in Amish country, Pennsylvania, on the night of April 12th. The target was an entire family. The Lapps, direct descendants of Jacob Lapp, one of the original settlers who had written the surviving letter about the bargains. The family, Father Eli, Mother Sarah, and their 2 young children, were awakened by the sound of persistent, rhythmic knocking on their front door. Eli looked out his bedroom window and saw her, standing on his porch, smiling up at him. He knew immediately who she was. The entire family had been living in fear for weeks. He grabbed his hunting rifle, called the police, and barricaded the bedroom door. His wife and children huddled behind him. The knocking stopped. For 10 minutes, there was only silence. They dared to hope she had left. Then, they heard the sound of the old farmhouse's summer kitchen door, which they knew they had locked, slowly creak open. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoed on the hardwood floors downstairs. Eli Lapp, terrified but determined to protect his family, raised his rifle and shouted a warning. The footsteps on the stairs began. Step, drag, step, drag. It was the sound of someone very old, very deliberate, climbing toward them. The 911 call from Sarah Lapp is part of the official record. You can hear it online. It is one of the most horrifying audio recordings ever made. You can hear the desperate, ragged breathing of the family, the terrified whimpers of the children, and the slow, inexorable step, drag, of the footsteps coming up the stairs. Eli is heard shouting, "Stay back! I'm armed! I will shoot!" The footsteps do not pause. They reach the top of the stairs. They move down the hallway. They stop outside the bedroom door. There is a moment of perfect, absolute silence. Then, a sound that makes the 911 operator gasp. It is the sound of a voice, an ancient, dry, rasping voice, humming that same lullaby the neighbor in Rochester had described. It is faint at first, then grows louder, right on the other side of the door. Then the doorknob begins to turn. Eli Lapp screams, "No!" and a single gunshot roars through the recording, followed by the sound of splintering wood. Then silence. The only thing left is the hum of the open phone line and the sound of a child beginning to cry. When state police tactical units breached the house minutes later, they found the bedroom door blown open from the inside by the shotgun blast. The room was empty. The Lapp family was gone. The only thing left behind was Eli's hunting rifle, lying on the floor, and carved into the door, fresh and deep, was the same sigil that had been scratched into Dr. Eris Thorne's door. The mark of the collector. The debt had been paid in full. In the aftermath, the FBI and paranormal investigators descended on the area. They found nothing. No forensic evidence. No signs of a struggle beyond the shotgun blast. The official report lists the disappearance of the Lapp family as under investigation, but the case has gone cold. The smiling woman sightings have stopped as abruptly as they began. There have been no new, credible reports since the night the Lapp family vanished. It's as if whatever purpose she had was completed. The ledger was balanced. The internet has moved on to new mysteries, new horrors. But for those who know, for those who lived through it, the fear remains. It's a quiet, persistent dread that lives in the corner of your eye. A fear that history is not just something we read about in books. It's a living, breathing thing that can walk out of the past and knock on your door, wearing a familiar, friendly face, and a smile that promises that some debts are never forgiven, only inherited. So the next time you're home alone, and the wind picks up outside your window, or the floorboards creak with the settling weight of the night, listen closely. Is it just the house? Or is it the sound of footsteps? And the next time you see an old woman walking alone at night, pay attention to her face. Does she look harmless? Does she look kind? Or is she smiling a little too widely? A little too knowingly? Because the story of the smiling woman is over. For now. But the historical records show that the famine of 1789 wasn't the first time such bargains were made. It was simply the most recent. And history, as we know, has a terrible habit of repeating itself. The debt is never truly gone. It only sleeps, and it's always waiting for the right moment to send its collector smiling.